Welcome to Art Beat, Canada's Art Pulse. I'm your host, Katie. In today's episode, we uncover the artistic odyssey of Emily Valentine, whose journey from wildlife paintings as a science major to perfecting the art of hyperrealistic still life is both inspiring and insightful. Emily shares the challenges and rewards of being an artist, emphasizing the significance of mindset and self-belief. She discusses her unique approach to composition and the impact of social media on her artistic journey. Stay tuned as Emily reflects on her experiences in the Canadian art scene and provides a glimpse into her upcoming projects. Emily, hi.
Hi, Katie. How are you?
I'm great, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing great.
Thanks so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. This is my first podcast.
Well, welcome. Emily, let's start by talking about what sparked your initial interest in painting and how it evolved into a passion.
I say that I've always been wired to be an artist. I've been interested in drawing and painting from as early as I can remember. I would say that compared to my peers, I put just so much more effort into drawing and painting. Like even when it came to simple things like decorating file folders for classes, I would be there really late and adding all this glitter and everything. And I was dedicated to making it look the best that it could. And I would say that passion continued through middle school and high school. I didn't go to an art themed high school, but I did take art courses from grades 9 through 12. And it really became a priority, especially in the later years where even if I had a science exam the next day, my priority was getting my paintings done into a place where I was proud of showing them to people. Mm-hmm. And when I was about 16, I followed a lot of artists that inspired me on Instagram. And one of those artists is Brooke Cormier from Pickering, Ontario. And I just saw her journey and her progression as an artist. And in her first year, she was able to make $30,000 selling her work. And I just couldn't believe that that was something that was even remotely possible. So I just was so inspired by her journey that I always kind of kept it in the back of my mind. Maybe if it's possible for her, I could do that one day.
And what subject did you start painting, or what were you most interested in painting in your earlier years?
I think I started out with a lot of wildlife drawings. I was really interested in birds and cats and dogs. And looking back, there was so many watercolor birds that I did and pastels of butterflies. And I think that was a great way of practicing because wildlife isn't as difficult as portraits. So I was able to feel that I had made a lot of progress and improvements because I was able to accurately draw those animals, as opposed to when it came to portraits, I wasn't as skilled at it.
And at what point did you start painting still life, and what draws you to still life?
I started painting still life in September of 2021. I was taking an art course in university at the time, and the theme of one of the painting assignments was to compose a still life from your home, because it was during COVID and a lot of us weren't leaving our houses. So I was fortunate in the fact that my parents are collectors of vintage items. So I was able to just accumulate a lot of props from my kitchen. And I arranged a still life of just vintage coffee percolator from the 50s. And then I had a bowl of oranges and some drapery. And it was the background was my blue studio. And after I shared that painting online, it was just a crazy reception compared to all the work that I had done previously. And I had 4 inquiries about purchasing that painting. And it just was really something that I thought, wow, maybe this is the direction that I should continue in, because I just love the practicality of setting things up at home and also just love the technical challenge that still life presents.
And so, as I understand, you were studying science or majoring in science in university. And so what prompted your shift from that academic pursuit into being an artist full time?
Yeah, so I would say that I never really thought about art as being a financially stable career choice. I was really afraid of the starving artist stereotype. So I thought that choosing science was the safe choice. And I really did love animals, and that really showed up in my early work. So I thought that being a veterinarian was a really suitable career idea. Mm-hmm. And then I was 3 years into that degree at Guelph, and then COVID happened, and I was taking 5 science courses online at home, and it was absolutely miserable. I did not enjoy doing learning how to use certain microscopes on YouTube videos, and I was just really disappointed. So I ended up just kind of stumbling across a podcast between Tim Packer and Brooke Cormier. And I had always followed Brooke Cormier from my teens, and she was talking about how her journey and how it's not only possible to make a living as an artist, but it's guaranteed if you have the dedication and determination that it takes. So after I heard that, it was just so inspiring to me that I actually just stopped what I was doing, and I went down and told my family that day that I'm dropping out of school to be a full-time artist. It was a pretty split-second decision, but I knew it was right once I heard that. I hadn't really done much painting leading up to that. I had kind of just been so engrossed in my science degree that there just wasn't time for art anymore. But I was just so confident that this was something that I had a passion for, and it just the dots connected in my mind, and it's made sense.
How did you navigate the uncertainties that came with such a significant career change?
Well, I would say that I was fortunate in the fact that my family was fully supportive of my dreams of becoming an artist. It wasn't like I told them that was my dream and they questioned me on it. They were just as sure as I was that I could be successful at it. And I think a lot of my optimism and just complete, maybe you could say naive optimism and delusion into thinking that I'd be successful. But they were encouraging of that. And they thought that as long as I really tried at it, that I could do anything. And I just didn't have any limiting or beliefs around the idea that I could be successful.
Mm-hmm. And what were some of the most rewarding aspects when you fully committed to your art?
There were so many. I would say initially just the joy of painting, being able to sit behind the easel for 6 hours a day and do what I love and really get to experiment with my creativity and try different compositions and methods of painting, and just felt like I was really expanding my skill set. And I was just really proud of the progress that I had made in such a short period of time. And then also the reception of my work was just immensely positive. I just remember being kind of overwhelmed by the number of people that were complete strangers asking to buy a painting from me or a commission from me. And I didn't even have really much of a social media following at the time. It was really just from references from friends of friends or people that I went to high school with. But it was, even when I started out, there was a never-ending supply of work to do.
Looking back, what advice would you give to someone contemplating a similar career change?
I would say that the most important thing would be to have a growth mindset and believe that you can do anything. It is kind of a cliche, but it's definitely been the case with me. It's not like my art from 5 or 10 years ago was amazing. It's not, people weren't asking to buy my work then. It's really just been a dedication to improving and kind of figuring out what your weaknesses are and making those your strengths. One of the weaknesses I had a few years ago was just drawing really complex subjects. One of the things in still life that's really difficult to draw is ellipses. So if a cup is on a tilt, if you're taking a photo of it from the top, then trying to get the circle so that it looks that way and not off is really, really difficult. So I apologize to anyone who has an early painting of mine where the ellipses is drawn incorrectly. But yeah, that was definitely a struggle. But again, it was just something that I really focused on improving. Like I drew ellipses just constantly in my studio so that I could get to a point where it just wasn't a problem anymore. And it wasn't something that, your eye focuses on as a problem in the painting.
You mentioned the starving artist stereotype. So I'm curious, how do you define success for yourself in the art world?
Yeah, I would say that if there's any time in history where it's possible to make a living as an artist, it would be now, because there are just so many different avenues to sell your work. Like you can sell in galleries, the traditional method, or you can sell your work on social media. And there's just such an accessibility of information now through YouTube and just through books. And I don't really think it's even necessary anymore to have an undergraduate in fine art or a master's in fine art. I think that you can learn a lot of that information and learn the technical skills on your own through the internet. And I can't say that everyone's journey will be the same as mine. Like I was very fortunate to have, I've had a lot of privileges, and having a family that supports me in this has been really helpful because I don't have to pay rent. Like I can live at home and I don't have to be stressed about those things. So that is a tremendous advantage. But I would also say that it's absolutely possible to make a living as an artist nowadays. Like when I went to the Artist Project, they get around 20,000 visitors every year. There are a lot of people who are interested in buying art. It is not that niche of a market. And I'm definitely not special or uniquely talented. I believe this path is open to anyone. And if they have a willingness to improve and a passion for the arts, then I think that you can definitely, without a doubt, make a living.
And has there been a particular moment in your career that has challenged the starving artist myth?
I would say the turning point of my career was the Artist Project in 2022. I applied for that show on a whim, and I, to my amazement, got in. I still can't believe it. And it was the untapped emerging artist section that I got into, so I didn't have to pay the expensive booth fee. I was able to get awarded a space there, and I had really not previously exhibited my work to a large audience before then. It had just been one show I did in Chatham where I sold paintings for $30. And that was fun too, but this was just a whole new ball game. And I just was a little bit overwhelmed by the idea. But once I was there and I had my work up on the walls and I was able to talk directly to people, it was just so incredibly positive. And I ended up selling out my wall on the first day I was there. And then on the subsequent days, I just kept putting every available piece I had on the wall, and it just kept selling right away. And it was just an unbelievable experience that challenged everything I had thought it was to be an artist, because I had kind of thought that it was really difficult to sell your work and you have to be a really salesperson. And I'm not that. I am not very good at marketing myself or my art, but it was like the work was selling itself. I didn't have to do anything. So that was definitely a shock in a good way. And then after the Artist Project, it's just been an upward trajectory where being able to sell on social media and then being able to sell at other local art events. But I just kept raising the price of my work, and it keeps selling. So that's just been amazing. I still can't believe that this is my life now.
And what role do you think mindset plays in navigating the art industry's financial aspects?
I would say to a large degree, you have to have faith that people will buy your work, because especially when you have periods where there doesn't seem to be sales, you can have times where there's a dip in the economy and there are other external factors that can influence whether or not people are buying art. And I know from talking to other artists that there was a lot of people buying during COVID because people were in their homes and they really didn't have that much to do and they were doing a lot of online shopping. But then now, like, especially in Canada, it's just a different reality right now, an economic recession. So there are less people who are buying art, but you have to know that, I mean, the economy is going to be back to where it was. And that definitely, it's a little bit difficult to go through those phases, but I would say that also having like an international audience on social media can really help with that, because nowadays I think about 60% of my sales are to the US and then 20% are to Europe and other countries. Like, it's only about 20% sales within Canada. So I haven't really had that experience, but it's definitely, I understand other artists talking about it, and it can be very difficult.
And how do you balance artistic integrity with financial sustainability?
That's a really great question, and definitely something that I have had challenges with, because I think I always ask with every painting that I do, will someone buy this? And if it's a painting that I think I'm going to be holding on to for a long time, then I tend to abandon it. And it's just because, like, even if it's something where it's like really kind of on the limits of what I do normally, where it's just a little bit experimental, then I get a bit suspicious that people aren't going to like it because it's outside my normal style. So I kind of retreat back into my comfort zone a little bit. It's definitely not a good habit, because ultimately I want to grow as an artist and I want to try other techniques that are different from hyperrealism. So I'm going to have to learn to get over that and just accept that there's going to be a portion of my paintings that aren't going to sell, and that that's okay.
What does this divergence look like when you're painting these paintings that you are not 100% certain have commercial viability? What's different about them?
I would say one of the factors is a difference in the props that I use. I think the teapots and the teacups that I do can really appeal to people because they're familiar. And people like say to me, oh, my grandmother used that teapot. And that's one of the reasons they're interested in my painting and buying my paintings. So as for experimenting with different props, it can kind of, like, the problem is that it doesn't resonate with people as much. It's not as familiar. So, I mean, that's my fear. I don't really know because I haven't tried it to a great extent, but that is my suspicion, at least.
Do you think there's a certain point in time where you'll be interested to put that work out and see how it does?
Yeah, I would say so. I think that maybe it would be best if I do the experimental pieces on like a really small scale when I introduce them, just because the big paintings for me, that take a very, very long time. I mean, sometimes it's like 70 hours of work on a big painting. So I wouldn't really want to try something totally new and go out on a limb if it's going to be 70 hours of work. But I think that one of the things that I do hope to do this year is experimenting with some small series of paintings. So I think one of the series that I'm going to be starting on this summer is like a cocktail series, where it's things from like vintage items that I've collected over the years from bars and just random cocktail related props. And I have never tried anything like that before, but I feel like that could be a really fun experiment.
And what sort of mindset shift do you think has to happen for you to feel comfortable pushing out this new artwork?
I think that I have to care a bit less about every piece being a masterpiece. That is definitely something that's difficult for me, is that every painting I do, I think that this one has to be better than all the other ones that I've done, and I won't accept anything less. And then that just puts so much pressure on painting. And sometimes then I'll procrastinate and I'll focus on other things because I'm just so worried about every painting I do being perfect. And it's not at all realistic. And my family has reminded me of that, because I definitely will get stressed if there's a painting that sits on my website for a while, and I don't like that. So it's definitely something that I have to just learn to let go of, and just accept that perhaps like a percentage of your paintings just won't sell, and that's okay, because I can give them as gifts to friends and family later on. So
what does that perfect painting look like to you, or what needs to happen in a painting to make it feel complete to you?
I would say I have to be extremely confident in the composition of the painting. And the paintings in which I have the most confidence in the arrangement of the objects are the ones that tend to resonate best with my audience. And it's definitely been the case. There are paintings that I've really enjoyed most, like the painting process the most, are also the ones that have the strongest compositions. So I think that I wonder, at least, if I am trying these experimental paintings, that if they are composed well, then maybe it won't matter what the props actually are. If it's just a matter of the arrangement is pleasing to the eye, that matters the most.
So then how do you approach the composition in your paintings?
So I sometimes have a fully formed vision in my mind as to what I want a particular painting to look like. And sometimes that translates to reality really nicely. And I have this idea of, like, one of the examples I can think of is a few years ago, I did a painting with these apples and Rainier cherries. And it was like a teapot set with like a corresponding bowl. It was like very bright blue fabric. And that one, I had kind of had this idea when I was in the grocery store shopping, that I noticed that the cherries and the apples matched really well. And I was like, oh, perfect. And then the idea just came to me. And that was one of my most popular paintings that I ever did. But I would say it's more often the case where the ideas, it has to be very hands-on and experimenting with different things. And most of the time, the ideas that I have that I think are going to be great actually are terrible in real life. And I'll set it up and I'm like, oh, this looks awful. And sometimes too, I have a hard time just letting go of an idea, because in my head, I'm like, oh, it's going to be so great. And then I try it on my desk and then it looks terrible. But I'm like, maybe if I just arrange it differently, maybe if there's just something about it that changes. But I find that if I'm investing like 2 or more hours into getting a composition to work, that it's best to just let it go. Best to just give up on it, because it's probably not going to produce something that's appealing to me as a subject to paint. But as for how I learned composition and the basics, I would say the most valuable resource was Tim Packer's color and composition course. I watched that a few years ago, and then the very first painting I did after it, which did happen to be my first still life, sold immediately. So that was definitely an encouraging note that I was on the right track. And yeah, I would just say, like, with composition, it's a skill you're always developing. It's not like you can read 100 books on it and you know everything. It's very much something that you always have to improve over the course of your art career.
Can you walk us a bit through the process and what it looks like when you're setting up a still life composition?
So a lot of the times I will start with I use the same table in all of my still life paintings, and I use typically the north light in my studio as the lighting. Sometimes I'll experiment with like different, like very dramatic lighting with flashlights and such, but most of the time I'll just use the natural light. And I will just try different arrangements of objects, and sometimes have, I would say, like, usually the teapot is like the focal point. Or I'll have a gourd if it's a fall scene. And it's just important for me to have a place in the painting which is the like center of interest. And usually it's an object of some kind. And then I'll have other things that relate to it in the background. But it can definitely take hours. And there some definite frustrating days where I'm like, okay, today I'm going to dedicate 8 hours to composing paintings, and then I come up with absolutely nothing at the end of it. And then there are other times where I'm like, okay, well, I just have like 10 minutes to compose something, and then I get 3 paintings out of it. So it's really hard to say. Like, a question that I get asked a lot is, how long does it take you to complete a painting? And the truth is that I can't say, because some of the compositions take hours to set up and some of them take minutes. So it's really, yeah, it's definitely a skill that is, it's definitely helpful to know composition, but it's really hard to put it into practice all the time.
What has been the most technically challenging subject that you've tackled?
Well, I would say initially for me, it was the reflections. I do a lot of painting, reflective silver items and teapots and jugs. And it was really hard to get the drawing and perspective right. And that was like, again, that was kind of like a problem that I had with the ellipses, where like if the drawing's not right, then people are always going to be looking at it like something's off. And it just really bothers me. It's like painful to look at. So once I was able to improve my drawing skills and get it to a level where I could draw everything accurately, then I would say the hardest thing, and the thing that I still struggle with, would be painting lemons. And lemons are my nemesis. They're so brutal. It still takes me sometimes 3 or 4 tries to get it right, because I know that the Dutch masters say that they used to brag by putting a lot of lemons in their paintings and showing off their skills. And now I kind of understand that, because they are so difficult. Like, it's really hard to shade yellow, like make yellow a dark color. And that's kind of what you have to do with lemons. And the subtleties and the color transitions are so tiny that it can be an absolute nightmare. You can't just add black to yellow and think that it's going to make it darker.
And you paint hyperrealism, which is like, I would say, a subset of still life. So how do you believe that these hyper-realistic still life paintings can connect with viewers on an emotional level?
I think that it's mostly an aesthetic experience. I wouldn't say like my work has meaning per se, but I hope that when people look at my paintings, that it brings them a sense of peace and calm and tranquility, just because our lives are so chaotic that still life is kind of like a window into just absolute peace. So that's definitely one of the appeals of that genre for me, is that there can be just so much that you can do with still life. There can be like, it can either be like super dramatic and lots of like dramatic light changes, and then there's also be like very small color changes, very subdued. So there's just, I think every painting would resonate differently, because some people, like, it's really appealing to them to have like the really light compositions where it's like 90% light and then a tiny bit of dark. And then the opposite is true for others. I know, like, in the case of my family, it varies quite a bit too in terms of what their preferences are.
Has there been a particular technique or skill that was a game changer for your art?
I mean, I'd probably say mastering composition. Mm-hmm. That was definitely the most valuable and transformative thing to learn. But as for like the actual painting process itself, I would say, well, maybe doing master's studies. That was definitely something that I did a lot of in university, was to replicate a painting from the past that I had really liked and match it to like the values and match the colors to the best of my ability. And that was a really valuable exercise in painting and realism, which is what I do, and being able to even like match another artist's brushwork and seeing exactly what their techniques are. That can be a really valuable exercise.
Are there any new techniques or mediums that you're eager to explore?
Yes, I would say that I'm really interested in trying out palette knife work. It's something that I've seen a lot of the artists that I look up to use as a tool, because I'm always using like the tiny one hair brushes to get really small details. But I think that if I use palette knives, it would kind of force me to have like a loose impressionist style, which is definitely something that's way out of my comfort zone, but also something that I think that I could learn a lot from. And there are definitely, it's true within composition that it's best to kind of have one thing be in focus and then everything else kind of blurry. So that's one thing that I would say is a weakness of mine, is that I have everything very much in focus because I do very tight realism. But I think that if my work would improve a lot if I was able to kind of let go of perfection for most of the painting and then have those perfection details on just like one specific element.
And how do you know when a piece is truly finished?
I would say that for me, it's kind of simple because I work in sections of the painting all at once. I know a lot of my artist friends will just put layer after layer after layer after layer of paint on there, and they're always like tweaking things in different areas. But for me, my process is more like one layer of acrylic paint, just as like a primer, so to speak. And then I do one layer of like the detailed hyper-realistic oil paint. And I work in very small sections at a time. So once I've finished a corner of the painting, then I don't go back to it and I don't change anything. So for that, it's just until like I've completed all of the space on the canvas. And as long as I can look at it and nothing really bothers me, then I won't really go back in and kind of mess with things and get it to lose some of that freshness.
What keeps you motivated and inspired to continue growing and exploring as an artist?
I would say listening to podcasts definitely helps fill my creative well, and reading books about other artists who I look up to. Like one of the books that I read recently was Mary Pratt's biography and her collection of work. And I'm very inspired by her work. She's also a hyper-realist still life Canadian painter. And her work is just stunning. It's like these very large scale watercolors. And she uses lots of reflections in her work too, and like aluminum foil. And I haven't yet seen her paintings in person, but it's definitely on my bucket list. And I think that reading her story and how she became an artist later in life and seeing her like full collection of work just really helps inspire me to get behind the easel and paint and improve my own skills and just really kind of push the envelope in terms of the subject matter that I'm focused on at the time. So yeah, definitely that helps. Going to art museums also helps. I just saw the Emily Carr exhibition in the Vancouver Art Gallery, and that was amazing. I've never seen her work in person before, but I was able to see like even her big statement pieces they had, which was incredible to see in person. And yeah, those would be some of my top ways, I would say.
So Emily, shifting topics a bit here, I'd like for you to tell us how social media has impacted your art practice and visibility.
I would say that I've been very fortunate on social media to have a lot of reach. And I think that I've kind of, in some ways, got the hang of the algorithm and how it works. And I mean, it's still the case where my videos seem to be doing pretty well. So I haven't had to change anything. But the videos for me that seem to work best are these art reveals where I spin a painting around, and sometimes people will complain because they're like, oh, it takes forever for you to spin the painting around. But that's the whole point. That's like that's the reason that it gets as much reach as it does is because of those 15 seconds. So yes, those ones have definitely been extremely helpful to me, and they're so simple. I mean, anyone can do them. You can just set up your phone, do one take, spin the painting around, put it with a trending audio, and those just do really, really, really well on both Instagram and TikTok. And I know I've had a lot of conversations with artists, and they say that because of their age or their art style, that they just can't have social media success. Like, they have a lot of limiting beliefs around being able to have like a huge platform on social media. And I would say that I don't think that that's true at all. I think that mostly that's just an excuse, and they don't want to go outside of their comfort zone. And I think for social media, the biggest factor that determines whether or not people have success on it is whether or not they're willing to put themselves out there. And like, it might be true that if you post a video that you would get a lot of criticism for your art, like that's always possible. But at the end of the day, if 100,000 people are seeing it and even like 90,000 of them don't like it, but 10,000 do, well, like then you have still an audience of 10,000 people that love to see your work. And like I've definitely had people like leave negative comments on my social media too and say like, oh, it's just fruit on a table. Like, there's no meaning in this, so therefore it's not valuable. It's not real art if it doesn't have a meaning. And that's just, I just don't care when people can think that that's the case, that my work just, it doesn't appeal to them, and that's fine. And they're not the people who I want to be I don't want them to see my work anyway. We're like, they don't have to, and I don't have to hear and listen to what their comments are. So I would say that you have to be willing to post those like cringy, super embarrassing videos too, because those are often the videos that have the most success. So participating in trends, keeping somewhat up to date on what the algorithms are promoting is really been helpful for me. And like overall, I would just say, don't fight the algorithm, because Instagram, like it's changed. It's not what it used to be. It used to be a photo sharing app, and now it is a video sharing app. And my suggestion would be to just go with that, because I used to try that. I used to just post photos on Instagram, and they would just get absolutely no reach at all. And I'm not saying it's not possible to get reach with photo posts. I think that you definitely can, but it's just so much harder. And I've looked at the stats for my art account, and 99% of my reach comes from the art reveal videos. So I would say that if you are an artist and you're finding that you're not having success on social media, then I would say that, have you tried art reveal videos? Because they do really well. And everyone who I talk to, I'm always encouraging them, like, please copy me, like use the same audios I'm using, do exactly what I do. And they've had success with it. So I would strongly recommend that.
So Emily, we're talking a lot about social media and your online presence. And I feel like based on our conversation so far, seems like you have a lot of international visibility. So how do you balance that with seeking national recognition at home in Canada?
So I would say that I do participate in quite a number of Canadian-only exhibitions, and a lot of these have to do with the Society of Canadian Artists, the Federation of Canadian Artists, and the Ontario Society of Artists. And these exhibitions have been really great for me in terms of just broadening my exposure within Canada, and having won awards in some of those exhibitions has been great for that, because then I can be publicized in Canadian magazines. So that's definitely been an aspect that has been really rewarding. And also I would say that participating in large exhibitions like the Artist Project in Toronto, and other, even some local ones, like I did Guelph Art on the Street, Oakville Art in the Park, and the Queen West Art Crawl in Toronto, that those are really great shows too, where I can talk with other artists who are Canadian and also talk with the collectors face to face and really get a sense of the Canadian art scene.
And how has the Canadian art scene influenced your development as an artist?
I would say that the Canadian art scene has been incredibly helpful to me in terms of just providing me with opportunities to showcase my work. And an example of that would be getting into the Untapped section of the Artist Project in 2022 for free, because that was really the turning point of my career. And that was the moment where I could start kind of selling my work just as fast as I created it. And I'd also say, just on the community end of things, that every artist who I've spoken to is incredibly kind and helpful and supportive. And they're always celebrating my victories along with me. And I always feel like I can reach out if I have questions.
Are there any changes or developments that you hope to see in the Canadian art scene?
I think that I would kind of wish for more artists to perhaps talk more online about the opportunities that exist, because that was definitely a challenge I had at the beginning of my career, where I didn't have any clue as to what exhibitions were good and which ones aren't. Mm-hmm. And it's really, really difficult as a beginner artist, is because sometimes you'll pay for a booth fee at a show and think that it's going to be a great show because they say that it's going to be on their website and they have a lot of people. But then you get there and people are walking around with hot dogs and candy floss. And you're kind of wondering if they showed up just to kind of have fun that day, or if they're actually interested in purchasing art. And I would say that talking to artists and asking them those questions has been a really great way to be able to determine which are the actual really good shows that are worth applying to, where they attract art collectors. And I've tried to make an effort to share that information as much as I can. But as for my experience, the shows that have been really good were the Artist Project, Oakville Art in the Park. Those were probably the two best art exhibitions that I've ever participated in.
Emily, what's next for you?
So right now, I am in the Society of Canadian Artists International Online Exhibition. I was able to get all 3 of my paintings in that. So that was really exciting. I just heard that yesterday. And then I'm also working through a teacup series right now of 12 by 12 inch paintings of a teacup collection that I bought at a thrift store a few years ago. And I'm just really trying to make each painting have a different theme. So I have actually a few paintings that I have of teacups that were left over from my Christmas challenge that I did, where it was it was called 12 Days of Artmas, where I did 12 Christmas paintings. So I had a few leftover compositions from that, which I'm now using for this teacup series that I'm working on. And then I'm hoping to do the cocktail series this summer, and then other just kind of themed series of small works, and just seeing what the reception of those is like will be interesting.
So Emily, where can everyone find your work?
My Instagram, I would say, would be the best place to find it. And that is Emily Valentine _art. And then TikTok is the same, Emily Valentine _art. And then my website is www.valentinefinearts.com.
Emily, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been great.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us on Artbeat, where the stories of Canadian art come to life. Follow us on Instagram at Artbeat Podcast for exclusive content and previews of what's to come. Don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform to stay updated with our journey through the world of Canadian art. Enjoyed the episode? Leave a review or recommend us to a fellow art enthusiast. Together, let's keep the conversation going and deepen our connection to the diverse world of Canadian art. See you next time.